All right, everyone. So there's a couple of things we touched on at the end of class last week that I want to go over in a bit more detail here, so that we can understand it, so that you can use it for the hammer if you need to use it for the hammer. But if not, then we can learn about these things later as well. So, and it's the idea of separating, combining, and using the target weld. So I have this pipe here. It's what we made in class. And some of you asked about making this as a separate piece and then sticking it on there, which is totally plausible. It would make it a little bit more perfectly round. Although if I was able to do this, while talking in a class pretty quickly, I'm sure some of you could make that even better by paying attention. But the idea of separate meshes is that if there are two separate polygons, you can only have one of them in component mode at a time. I mean, technically, you might be able to maybe glitch it out until both of them are in vertex mode, but you won't be able to target weld between vertexes. You won't be able to merge vertexes. You won't be able to cut across both of them. You won't be able to do anything with the both of them. In order to make them part of the same mesh so that you can be in component mode for both times, you actually have to use this combine button. And by doing that, they become one surface, right? So we can see here right now there's two things in our outliner. Why don't I name these? That will probably make it a lot better. Let's see, pipe 2, because there's already a other pipe, sphere. There we go. So we got these two things. And then if I use the combine button, they become one thing. And if I undo, they become two things again. And so what happens is when I combine them, now they both go into vertex mode at the same time. But they also both have the exact same transform node. That's what makes them the same object, is that they have all the same transforms, and then their pivot point is just stuck in the middle of them. Now, this particular example doesn't make any sense because it's not often you're just going to stick a random sphere on something. But we can also separate things if they turn out to be not connected by any geometry. So I have this here. I purposely kind of unbeveled this area. And I'm going to select this ring. But in order to do it, I'm not just going to hold down shift and go around the whole way. I can use a little bit of a trick. When you're in edge mode, you can double click and get the whole edge. Now we can't do that with a face because it doesn't exactly know what ring of faces you want. But if I click one and then kind of go over to this other side and then double click the next one. Oh, that's no good. Let's try this. Well, that's new. It's not going around the way I expected it to. There it is. I'm going too far around. I go a few blocks basically, and I double click. And you can see it's catching a bunch of others that are in between theirs. And so instead of clicking 20 times around, I double clicked 4 times around, right? So I'm holding shift and I double click a few times. You can see if I went too far, it kind of, went around the whole thing. We don't want that. And just to double check, I'm going to, look and see, all right, my move tool is pretty much in the center. I don't see anything else highlighted, right? And because these are faces, I can just hit delete. And so while these are both technically the same polygon, they're both technically the same mesh, these are separated. It's a very tiny gap, but there is a gap in there. And what that means is that because there's a hole there, I can tell these to be separate. And you see they changed color, and now this one, well, its pivot point went to the center, which is unfortunate. I can say modify center pivot, and it'll be somewhere useful, right? And so now we have two separate pieces. And if I want to combine them again, I can combine them. Now, the reason I'm doing that is let's pretend we want to make this as a separate thing. Let's pretend I did that. So I'm going to edit this a little bit. I'm going to grab this edge loop right here, and I'm going to use the little scaling trick where I scale it along this axis so that it's flat, just to make it look a little bit more like something that would be, attached on, right? And so it's going to kind of come in like this. Now, one of the reasons why I don't encourage people to do this at first is that there's a lot of technical math involved. When we were extruding out from here, yeah, we had to come up with a little bit of a pattern with the multi-cut tool, but you often have to do that. And that little bit of a pattern is pretty memorable. But once you have it, your edge loops are going to match. If you don't do that, then we have to count edge loops, and you still have to cut into this though, because we can't go over. If I look at this clean side over here, I can't just select a bunch of faces, delete them, and then attach something to right here, because what I'm attaching is round, this is square, and it's not going to, you're going to have 5-star, you're going to have, wrong-sided polys, because, well, that's interesting. I'm seeing a broken glitch here. That's good fun. We'll fix that later. There's a problem here where we can't attach it correctly to the corners, right? We have to, when we create this, make sure there are 4-sided polys all the way around to attach this to. And that makes things difficult. So what it might seem like making this separately would be easier, and it is easier to model it, but it's much harder to connect it. There was a little bit of work we had to do to extrude this out, but connecting it is so much harder. So the only reason this is going to work is because this originally came from here. And so I kind of already did that work. But if you're starting from scratch, you have to still use your multi-cut tool, still cut in that shape, cut in those corners, round everything out as best you can, and then use this here. Now let me move this back to where it was. There we go. So how to connect these two things? I hold down Shift. Oh dear. There we go. I make sure I'm in object mode for both. I hold down Shift to select both, and I say combine. But I want these to be closer. I want this to be close. Yeah, but not so close. I don't want them overlapping. I still want there to be a clear delineation of what's going on. So hold down Shift, I say combine. They're now part of the same mesh, and it's now called Pipe 3. And now when I go into vertex mode, I can see all the vertexes, and I can use this thing called target weld. Now target weld has 2 different options. I didn't show you the second option, which is when you select 2 things, it merges them in the center. We don't want that. This is rounded exactly the way we want it to. We want this one to match this one, right? So the surface of the cylinder is perfectly cylindrical, so we need this new thing to match it, which is why we say target. And what that means is that you click the one thing that you want to move, drag it over the thing you want it to match, and it'll go like this. Click and drag. And it's basically like dragging a vertex to its new place. And we're stitching this together. Now you can see why I didn't want this overlapping at all, because that would have been problematic. It would have been hard to see things, especially when you get to the end and you stitch up all the sides. Again, it's going to move the first one that you hover over to the second one. Just like this. And last one. All right, and by doing that, you go back into edge mode. You can see that it's moved these vertexes to round out in that weird oblique way that the cylinder is rounded out. And now we could go in and we can, bevel this edge or smooth it out or do something. I think technically I've made this slightly longer than it used to be, but that's fine. So, we can bevel that interior edge. That way it holds. Yeah, I would probably round that out a little bit more before doing that, but we smooth it out. We can see how it looks. And I know it's not perfect, but here's the thing. Oh, some of my bevels went away. I fixed a merge earlier. And it looks like it undid my interior bevels because they were very, very tight. So that's another lesson, is that when you use that merge tool, I got rid of some of them. So you can see I have to do some cleanup because some of my bevels went away and some of them didn't, which is disappointing. Come on, there we go. But if we go back to this for a second and smooth it out, yes, technically this is not quite a perfect circle where it is attaching. But how many things are exactly perfect circles? If I look at this side over here, where my bevel's actually held, it looks nice, except it looks too nice. It's too perfect. You'd probably have to do a lot of work with bump maps or something to, I guess, imperfect it. Whereas this, it's a little bit more mechanical. It's a little bit more, like it's not perfect. And so there can be a little bit of a benefit to it being not quite a perfect circle, because certainly a weld of this piece to this piece in real life would not be quite so perfect. All right, so that is the act of separating things and combining them in order to that's basically my lesson on why we don't do that, because it's hard for things to match up perfectly. This only worked for my demonstration because I made this from here. And if you make something from scratch, you really do have to, there's a lot of math involved. Then you have to delete edges to make sure they work, or you have to bring them down. It's a lot more work than it seems like. Because at the start of it, it'll be easier because you'll be working from scratch, but then trying to connect them, it will be much, much worse.